Welcome to the Budget 2023 Public Information Meeting. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Eric Thompson with RDOS Communications, along with Jim Zaffino, RDOS Manager of Finance, and we are joining you from the traditional territory of the Syilx people in the Okanagan Nation. Coming up, Mr. Zaffino will provide an overview of RDOS 2023-2027 5-year financial plan bylaw number 2988. This is the draft 2023 budget at first reading as of January 5th, 2023. In just a moment, we'll share the budget presentation video. This is a pre-recorded video that is available on YouTube and also through the RDOS website and RDOS Regional Connections. We'll have that presentation for you. It provides an overview for the participating members. You can find detailed budgets for each of the 9 electoral areas, 6 member municipalities, and Penticton Indian Band by visiting the budget project page at regionalconnections.ca. That's regionalconnections.ca. Following our short video presentation, Mr. Zaffino will be available to answer questions. We'll be here for a full hour, recording this broadcast on January the 12th. And during our live WebEx broadcast, we'll be taking questions as well through chat and through the WebEx service as well, video or audio. If you'd like to ask a question, please select the raise hand option. That's *3 on your phone. And to lower your hand, you can press *3 as well. And if you're watching the tape broadcast, you can also provide feedback to the RDOS board via email, budget@rdos.bc.ca. That's budget@rdos.bc.ca. You can also send a letter through the mail. Regional District Office is at 101 Martin Street in Penticton. That's V2A5J9, V2A5J9. So we'll get to our short video presentation and then we'll have time for questions and answers on Budget 2023.
That the Regional District Board authorized as a first reading on January 5th, 2023. One of the things that I'd like to discuss is the conundrum of what a regional district is. A lot of municipalities have different controls and have different rules, and we have something different, so I just want to quickly discuss what those are. Each regional district is a corporation on its own, formed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council under letters patent. This is very similar to how a municipality is created. The letters patent describes the geographic area, the municipalities, and the electoral areas which are included in our regional district. The power of the legislative service is vested in the board of directors. There are 9 electoral area board of directors, and there are 6 municipalities. Between the 9 and the 6, there's a total of 20 board members. The parliamentary procedures dictates that each of the 20 members are the ones that determine the budget and the process that the regional district is governed under. Regional districts are not taxing authorities. That's important to remember. The board of directors sets the budget, then requisitions funded tax requisition. The province issues the tax notices to the citizens in the electoral areas. For that service, they charge 5.25% administration fee on top of what our operational budget is. For 2023, I am projecting a $895,587 administration fee that is directly paid to the provincial government. The provincial government issues the tax notices to the citizens, and this is why they charge their administration fee. Regional districts do not tax municipalities. They tax the citizens of the regional district on our behalf. That's important to note. Shared services often cross jurisdictional lines, but taxes are assessed so that each property owner pays the same amount for the services regardless of geographic boundaries. Regional district taxes are based on the services, not the location. Some regional district services are legislated. For instance, general government, solid waste management, plans, 911 telecommunications. So those are mandatory. Though by that, municipalities and electoral areas cannot opt out of those services. Most of the services which the regional district provides are by choice, and services are created only with the approval of receiving services. So if a new service has to be created and there's a taxing involved. There's either an approval by the citizens who ultimately pay the taxes, or there's a dictation that it's a mandatory. The regional district is different than a municipality. Municipalities have anywhere from 3 to 5 budgets, usually general services, which includes roads, snow control, sidewalks. There's water budget, sewer budget, and using Penticton and Summerland as example, electrical. Regional districts create a separate budget for every service that we operate. For 2023, the regional district budget has 162 separate services, which means we have 162 operational budgets. We also have an additional 46 capital budgets, which are funded only from reserves, grants, or donations, or in some cases, borrowing. Separate budgets ensure only that those who participate in the service pay for the service. Also, those that requested the service are also paying. With a separate budget for each service, only those participating in the service will pay either through taxes, parcel tax, or user fees. And this next section is on the budget process and the regional district services provided. The budget was launched in 2022, so every budget for the regional district and most municipalities, they start early in the year. So with the August start, their managers have a lot of time to determine what the 23 budget would be. There's a baseline operational budget created. With that baseline, managers look at change requests for program service level, changes to budget or to the requests that the board asked to increase the service level. Budgets include approved requests. The board looked at a preliminary draft budget, which the managers created. They determined which areas they needed correction or change, and then ultimately was changed to go to first reading. By law, municipalities have May 15th to adopt the budget, but regional district have March 31st. Types of regional district services. So there's various types of services that we provide. Regional services, for instance, those are services where all of the municipalities and electoral areas are included, and they include things like heritage conservation, 911, emergency planning, general government, human resources, the continuation on regional services, legislative services, illegal services, regional trails, etc. This is just a number of the services that are classified under regional. Later on, I do want to show you the whole 162. I won't mention them, but I just want to mention some of them. Types of RDOS services. The next type is a rural service, so services where the majority of electoral areas participate and no municipalities would. For instance, would be building inspections, for instance. Each municipality would have their own building inspection departments, however, electoral areas wouldn't. So with that, the electoral areas would pay for those services that they benefit from. Other areas would be Okanagan Regional Library. Penticton, for instance, has its own library, so they wouldn't be included in there. Continuation on the services, shared services. Only those participating in the services pay for the service. A good example is victim services, fire departments, parks and recreation. One of the examples that I use is you have a service for Anacus Mountain, for instance. Only those that benefit in that area would pay. A shared service would be a Keremeos Fire Department. Keremeos Fire Department is shared between Keremeos Area B and G, so they shared in the benefits from the service, so they also pay. Additional types of services is local services, services where only a defined group of properties within an area participate. A lot of those would be the water services where, for instance, Missoula is a specific service where only the people that benefit from that water service pay. Naramata is a number also included. There's 9, I believe, water services that would work like that. Again, fire protection is also another one where a good example would be Willowbrook. The areas people who live in Willowbrook would pay for those services that they benefit. Earlier, I discussed that there's 162 services. I thought that it would be interesting to show just how many services we provide. This results in a budget that has 18 different schedules, totaling 1,075 pages. It has all that information so that we can be transparent and the directors can follow through the budget and determine if there's any changes that they need. So on this page, for instance, some of the major services would be general government, information services, which would be IT. You see on the far right, the fire protection services. There are a number of fire protection services that regional district provides. There's a large number, as you can see, water systems. There's a lot of recreation services that we provide, sewer for OK Falls, grant and aids. There's the pool in Karameas, cemeteries, and street lighting. So that's a total of 162 operational services. Continuing with the budget process, the RDOS staff begin to build the budget, as I stated earlier, in August. It's a 5-year budget with a current 2023 budget with an additional 4 years. So that's a legislative requirements that the board must authorize a 5-year budget. And that shows a continuity so that the board can determine if the tax requisitions are reasonable or not. So with that, from those workshops that I discussed earlier, for the last one was December 5th, we create a final budget that goes to the board for first reading. That does not mean it's going to be adopted at that amount. The board, at their discretion, can change the budget right up until March for adoption. The draft budget then goes to the public for consultation at first reading, which is what we're doing right now. We look at any recommendations or any suggestions. Staff then takes these recommendations and ideas to the board before final adoption. So this is something that we created. It's something new to the regional district. I looked at the assessments for 2023 using the completed roll and determined what the average assessment increase is for the regional district, and it was, I believe it was 14.71, and that straight line that you see, that's the average. The other line that you see that's going up and down, that is each of the different 16 areas that we have. With that, you can see that the middle one, which is 23.27 Area B, is the biggest increase. What this does is it affects the tax requisition share for the electoral area or member municipality. The higher the increase above average you have, the more of the share that the electoral area or municipality pays in the service. So in this case here, Area B is the highest increase. That means their share of the service that they participate in pays just that much more. This is just something, additional information that shows the percentage of the actual taxes that they pay based on the assessments from 2023 and 2022. The cost support, one of the things that's been discussed by the board and changed in 2022 is the administration cost. The administration cost is what we call the support costs. So there's a cost to having a human resource department, legislative services, finance, corporate services, and information services. These support costs are not the wages, they are what it costs to actually have the employee be able to perform the service. For instance, for information services, we need licenses for each of the computers to have the employee do whatever job that's required of them. So 88% of these costs are associated and charged back on a percentage basis to the operational costs and 12% to the capital costs. Before this, it was actually 20% to the capital and 80% to operational. And this is just something, a comparison of where the costs are charged. For 2023, operational costs was 1.6 million. For capital, it was 222,000. So that's charged based on a formula which the board changed the policy again, as I stated, in 2023. So what's new in the budget from one year to another? What's new is the grant and aids. Each year there's a regional grant and aid request that the board looks at and determines the needs for the community, what affects the best. So they don't make the budget until a presentation is made and the board determines which ones are accepted and which one are not. Also included is the requests for the full-time equivalent, which is the staff. So managers ask for, and sometimes it's discretionary based on the board, if the full-time equivalent are accepted or not, or supplemental requests. A supplemental request is where the service is increased, and a good example that I use is if a park had their grass cut twice a month, and the managers recommended that it's now cut 3 times a month, that's a service level increase, and it's also would be a tax increase. A case is made to the board of why the board should accept it or not, and the board determines yes or no. And they're not included in the original budget until the board actually makes a decision. And finally, there are a number of capital requests which are made to the board. The 2023 board requests, There's a detailed description of what the costs are and the implications of what the operational costs will be if the capital cost is accepted. The program change requests continued. It's important to remember that not every property is impacted by every change request. So whenever there's a change request, we identify which area pays and what the impact is. So again, as I stated, only those who participate in the service that the change request is affected pay. Some change requests impact taxes, user fees, or the parcel tax. This section right here is the general government services for grant and aid requests. These are what the board received as requests, and the total approval is $17,250. It is not definite until final reading, so it is tentative at this point. And this next section is on the major capital projects which the regional district has included in the 2023 budget. A lot of the operational costs are transfers to reserves. These reserves are used to fund major capital projects. Along with that, there is grants, donations. Sometimes it's borrowed, which then ultimately reflects debt servicing. But in this case here, I just thought I'd show you some of the major ones. It's not all of them. So this one here talks about 911 emergency call. There's a $100,000 budgeted for the Willowbrook Tower, which is funded from money that's already in the bank. Just one thing that I just want to remind everyone for capital projects. All capital projects, the money cannot be used to finance from taxes. It's all financed from pre-existing reserves, grants that we received from the provincial government or federal government, donations, or again, debt servicing. On the debt servicing, there's a whole process where the board must approve it because they realize that there's a debt servicing component that ultimately goes back to the operational side. On the next section is the fire department for Karameas. You can see that there's a number of projects in here, and one of them is a carry forward from last year for a land acquisition. The other one here is regional trails, major projects here. The one is $118,000 for Skaha Lake Trestle. As you can see, there are a lot of wish lists that hopefully can be completed in 2023. There are some carry forwards for projects from last year that were not done for whatever reason, but they are intended to be done in 2023. Cleveland Fire Department, biggest single project here would be a pumper truck. That pumper truck is going to be paid over a number of years, and the first payment would be $200,000. The board just authorized that pumper truck on January 5th. The total budget over the 4 years that it's going to take for the truck to come in is just under $1 million. The continuation on the fire departments, the largest project here is the fire hall construction, and that's a carry forward from 2022. And you can see that Apex Fire Department is a new fire department. There's a lot of upgrade capital projects that have to be done, everything from the fire hall to purchasing fire trucks. And the Apex Fire Department is well underway in establishing these capital projects. Naramata Water System, just briefly discuss what the projects are for water system OK Falls, refuse disposal. There's a large number here for the compost facility, which is $1.9 million. The next one here is the refuse disposal, Penticton. That's Campbell Mountain, so that's user fees, not taxes. So that one there is got a lot of upgrades in there with a $1.2 million for the organic composting. And the corporate facility, that's essentially the building that the majority of our regional district staff work in. For the electoral areas, the corporate facility is equivalent to the city hall for the municipalities. And information services IT, there's a huge increase in costs in the last few years. There's a catch-up. The licensing costs for IT have increased materially, but we're hoping that increases are going to be less of a material amount. And here's some more community parks. Just an example on the Oliver ones, for instance, Area C. Only Oliver and Area C would be the two that would be paying for it. So not everyone is paying into these services. I just thought be interested to see the regional district as a whole for the capital projects. And the Karameas Recreation Center for this one here, Karameas pays, Area B and G pay. Paid, I should say, not paid, because they paid eventually through the transfers to reserves on the operational side. And then there's Tulameen for the capital structure. And recreation for OK Falls. And in this case here, it's just OK Falls that does pay. And again, here's Naramata. Again, it's just Naramata that pays. How are the capital projects funded? As I stated earlier, they are funded through reserves, grants, donations, borrowed funds, which ultimately have a debt servicing component, and there's gas tax funding, which is not, it's technically not a reserve, it's money that we receive from the province on a per capita basis. Also included in the 2023 operational budget is a transfer to both operational capital reserves in the amount of 4.3 million, which is 9.42% of the operational budget. So that's putting money in the bank for future capital projects or operational needs if an emergency occurs. The 23 budget, as stated earlier, is $53.7 million and $20 million additional for capital projects. That $20 million has nothing to do with any tax increases. The table on the following slide summarizes the overall requisitions. The requisition for the total funding for the 2020 budget is $23.9 million. The tax requisition has increased by $1.8 million over 2022 for an 8.34 increase. After the non-market growth is taken into consideration, it's 6.53. Non-market growth is new construction that wasn't there before, where there's the value of the empty property may be $100,000. So in prior years, it would have been taxed as $100,000. Now there's a property on it. Let's say now with the property and the house, it's now $1 million. So that $900,000 wasn't there to be taxed. So it's now helps increase the payment that everybody else would pay. So this is the requisition summary. This shows what each of the different electoral areas and municipalities, member municipalities pay. It shows the 2023, 2022, the percentage change, and the actual tax amount that would be taxed back based on the assessments. This is something I thought might be interesting in that this shows the graph that shows from high to low, where you see the Penticton Indian Band's got the lowest one. They only have approximately 4 or 5 services that they pay into. That's why it's so low. The other areas have a number of different services that they pay, and it just shows in order of amount that they paid. So it shows where Penticton, for instance, you see them in 4th highest at $2.5 million. However, that's not the whole picture. If you then take the tax requisition and do it on a per capita basis, I'll use Penticton as an example, it goes from the 4th highest to the 3rd lowest in a per capita basis. The more residents that you have, the more property you have, more assessment you have, the more that you pay, but it also benefits more people. So when you take a look at the per capita basis, I think that's more of a realistic way to compare the services that the regional district does pay. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, please contact the Regional District, Okanagan-Similkameen. All of your feedback will be presented to the board at 3rd reading.
Bye. And we are back live, recording on January 12th between 6 and 7 p.m. If you're watching this on YouTube, the tape, you can certainly get in touch with the RDOS. We'll have those details coming up shortly. I'm Eric Thompson with RDOS Communications, and Jim Zaffino is here as well. Jim is the Manager of Finance with the RDOS. Jim, that video was recorded on Monday, January 9th. It is approximately 21 minutes long. A lot of information contained in there. You've had a chance now to share this presentation with the town of Oliver. You'll be going to the other municipalities as well and some electoral areas. We'll have those details in just a moment as well. What is the biggest challenge in putting together a budget like this that has so many moving parts?
The biggest challenge is that we have 162 services. Additional 46 services of the 162 require capital. The biggest challenge is to be transparent. There's just so many budgets that it's hard for people to look at each and every single one. That's why I have approximately 1,075 pages distributed. I said originally 16. There's actually more than 20 schedules. I'm trying to itemize where all the different costs are and why. One of the schedules, for instance, details all the variances and just a brief description of what it is, so that the directors can actually look at exactly where the variance is and ask me, and then if I don't know the answer, I will then ask the manager. So that the biggest challenge is the amount of services that we have. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's actually, I agree with having the 162 services. Each service is an entity in itself. Essentially, if I really want to take a look at it, you have 6 of our municipalities in there on their own. However, the electoral areas are essentially the same as municipalities. So the taxes has to be fair. One thing I do want to point out is when I took the budget to the board and they okayed for first reading, the directors made a small number of changes. So what you see here includes those changes, but the biggest change is that the 2023 completed tax roll has not been received. I explained to the board when they voted on it that I was using the 2022 because I did not receive the 2023. I actually received it 2 days after. So on the weekend, I updated it. And that's why I actually came up, there was a graph that I produced. Danny, can you show them the graph that I've got on the screen? So there's a graph that I'm looking at it, which says factors affecting 2023 requisition. It was in the presentation. It shows the average increase for assessments, and then it shows each individual one as the BC assessment authorities gave it to us. So the distribution of who pays what in the tax requisition changed. So, for instance, Area B had the highest increase at 23.27%, well, with the average being 14.71. So it doesn't mean that Area B had a 23.27 increase. What it means is that their portion did pay. And in each of the different presentations that I make, I actually point out to each area what that means. If you take a look at some of the lower ones that did go down, for instance, Area D went down slightly. So again, the tax requisition went down. And it's important to note that what this means is even if the budget for 2022 and 23 was exactly the same dollars, the tax amount that each area would pay would be different.
We are going to take questions if you're watching this live on January 12th, and to do so through WebEx, you can raise your hand. We have a chat function as well, so you can ask a question through chat if you'd like to. And I'll mention a couple of dates real quick. We have some budget presentations coming up in RDOS electoral areas, starting with January 17th in electoral area G for Karamias at the Similkameen Rec Center. That's at 3 o'clock. Again, that's on January 17th. And also on that same day, a little bit later on, Jim Zafina will be on location in Headley at the Headley Community Hall. And that's between 6 and 7 p.m. So that is January 17th. And then for electoral area I, there is a budget presentation on Saturday, February 4th. And that starts at 3 o'clock. It's at Apex Mountain Resort in the cafeteria. And that's from 3 to 4. And I believe you've just confirmed Kaleden for February 11th. That's 4 o'clock at the Kaleden Hall. So at these budget presentations, you'll present the video that we saw earlier, or your live version of it, I should say, and then you'll answer questions. What are the types of questions you're getting? Because there's a lot of information here, and people want to know how it affects them in their community. What are the types of questions you're getting?
Well, first of all, I just want to clarify, this is not the video that each individual one will be shown. I have prepared a specific video for presentation for each electoral area. So instead of just being generic as this one is, it's more specific.
And it'll be you live.
Yes, it would be me live. That's the other thing. Just some of the questions are, why is there an increase? And in some cases, it's service level, it's CPI, but mostly the surplus was not used to reduce the taxes. So the board now has changed the policy since I came here, in that the surplus used to be used to reduce the tax requisition. That's no longer the case. So if they look at something 2-3 years ago, the tax requisition may have been lower because of the surplus. The surplus now in the majority of the cases is going to operational reserves. So that's new. That's fairly new. This will be the second year now that it was introduced, and so far it's working.
Can you remind us what CPI is?
Consumer Price Index, which just so that people in the audience know, as of the end of November, because December is not out, it is 6.7% for the BC Consumer Price Index.
Where do the assessments fit into all of this for you?
Huge. It dictates what the tax requisition will be per each area. For a municipality, it's one number. For me, it's each one of those. is different. When the British Columbia Assessment Authority sends us the numbers, it is probably 50 or 60 different sheets of assessments that I have to look at, because the 161 services are broken up by assessment for each area. And unfortunately, one of the areas that we're restricted in is if the BC assessment has a higher weight increase on residential areas and lower than on business, we're not allowed to adjust it so that the tax increase is consistent while municipalities are. So what I am seeing though this year, and I'm going to do some more analysis, is how high did the residential increase? What's the difference between the increase from residential and business? Because that does affect the tax.
So here we are on January 12th. This process started, it started late in 2022, but specifically November 18th and December 2nd, 2022, the draft budget was reviewed by the RDOS Board at 2 workshops. And then after first reading, which was January 5th, that then enabled you to go out to public consultation. That community consultation goes until February 17th. So there's a lot of time for people to provide input, to ask questions. We have a live broadcast here on January 12th. Not a lot of input, not a lot of involvement. Not that that's a surprise, but what do you find when do people start picking up the phone? When do they start sending you emails and say, hey, I just noticed that I've got some concerns? Because now is the time to provide that feedback and input on these services.
This is the time, because it gives me opportunity to add it to the reports and drill into it. In some cases, it's more than just saying, well, there's a service level increase for whatever reason. It gives me time to go back to the manager and say, can you give me some more information so that I can go to the board with that information. The more information I give them, the more informed the directors would be, and knowledge is power, and then the power should be in the board's hands.
Any feedback that you receive will be presented to the board. Is that right?
Correct.
And that is feedback that's received via email. It could potentially be someone at the grocery store talking to you, but probably not. It's going to likely be an email or maybe even a phone call.
Yes. I've got a document here that I'm keeping track of the questions, and then I would elaborate. Some of them might be easy, and some of them might not.
And then when you're at these public presentations, whether it's for a municipality or for an electoral area, and people are providing comments, that information you'll keep track of as well?
Correct.
Okay, but ideally someone would send you an email with their comments and concerns or questions.
I'd prefer that. That way I can understand it better, or I can get back to them rather than someone just verbally comes to me in the street or in the store.
Yeah. So we've been doing this now for a couple of years, you and I working together on this budget consultation. And what are you finding as far as the timeline for when people really start to pay attention to this? Is it as you get closer for second and third reading, when people start to realize that this budget is going to be put in place pretty quick here?
It's an interesting question, because it gets closer, more questions after second reading, because that's more realistic. So right now it's at first reading. There could be changes. In fact, I've been approached by some of the directors to change some of them. The one as recently as today.
We have a couple of electoral area directors, a few of them joining us. I see Sabrina Monteith, Director for Electoral Area I, Adrian Federigo, Director for Electoral Area E, and Electoral Area Director F. Riley Gettins. For those directors and all of the other directors involved in these budgets and the municipalities, but specifically for the electoral area directors, there's a lot of input and a lot of discussions that have to take place during this entire process. And that's discussions that take place with not only the public, but with staff as well, on where the budget's going.
That's correct. A lot of meetings with the directors. However, when a director wants to talk about the budget that affects a service level, I ask that the manager is included, because I can't just cut a budget for an operational budget without having an effect, and the manager needs to talk to the director to determine what that effect would be.
Yeah. I'll take a quick moment to remind everyone who is watching this that there are a number of places you can find information about the budget. If you go to RDOS Regional Connections, that is the interactive website for the RDOS, where all the projects and initiatives are listed. If you go to the budget presentation there, you'll find all the detailed budgets for each of the electoral areas and municipalities as well, and Penticton Indian Band is there. You can also find links to any of these upcoming presentations that we mentioned, and a link to the video I think the video was really helpful for someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of input or a lot of background on how the RDOS budgets work, to provide a general overview of the process.
That's correct. I also have how a regional district works. I present that to the municipalities too, because a lot of times the misconception is that our budget is like their budget, and it could be easily changed and easily identify where the changes are made. One thing I do want to point out is that on our website, starting tomorrow, I will have the new assessments linked to the budget so that the actual taxes can be identified. And one other thing that's changed is, as of now, I actually have the actual non-market growth. And to no surprise, the largest non-market growth was Area E, which is Naramata. It was at 4.02%. And one of the other higher ones was Area G. So what that non-market growth, as I stated in the presentation, is that's the new property. And the directors a lot of the directors are going to be using that to essentially lower the taxes.
I'm going to ask Danny if he can, Danny Francisco is the Manager of Information Services for the RDOS. Ask if he can scroll back to the slide, and maybe you know what number that is, Jim, the slide that shows the request for grant and aid. I've got a question about grant and aid for you. Grant and aid is money that is potentially available to different groups and organizations. There's a process involved. They would go to one of those budget workshops we mentioned that happened later in 2022. I believe it was the December 2nd meeting. And those groups make a presentation and make a pitch for the funds they would like.
It's online.
There you go. It's what number is that? It looks like slide 26.
26.
So the question I have for you then is, once these grant and aid requests are narrowed down, they're sitting there. That doesn't mean those groups will get the funding. What input does the public have on whether those groups get the funding or not?
In all of the presentations that I make, I show this so that if there's a comment on any of these asks, then that goes to the board. And I've had questions on this before, which you take to the board, and then they can make a new decision. This isn't done in stone right now. It can change right up until third reading. They will not get any of the money until third reading, and whatever changes are made, anything from adding something that wasn't there before or reducing or adding the amount that was accepted at first reading. But this is why it's on here, because it does affect, it's a charge against general government, which means everyone of the 15 areas pay a portion based on assessment.
Both of the budget meetings that I mentioned, the workshops, are available on RDOS Regional Connections. That's rdosregionalconnections.ca. So if anyone wants to watch what took place at that meeting, they'll see the presentations and they'll see the discussion as well.
Correct. I also want to emphasize that there are restrictions. Not just anyone can apply. When they apply, it has to have helped more than 3 different electoral areas. They cannot apply to another government, so that there's no double dipping. And there's a number of other rules. You can't use it for wages. You can't use it to purchase capital. And essentially, it's supposed to help the regional district as a whole.
Also, for these grant and aids, it's not carried over. It's not a given that if you get money one year, you'll just keep getting it.
That's correct.
You have to keep
Each
reapplying.
year, you have to reapply. And not only just reapply, but make actual live presentation to the board.
Yeah. It was challenging during COVID to do these presentations and to make some allowances for that.
But it happened.
Yeah.
So this year was easier because they all came in live except for one where it was video.
Yeah. So we've been talking about some of the big challenges you have, because this budget is a multifaceted document. You have it beside you there. We've got hundreds of pages, different budgets within the different electoral areas, municipalities, and Penticton Indian Band, that creates one document, one budget. Is there one RDOS budget, or is it's the multiple sections that go with it, really?
There is one budget that ultimately the tax requisition summarizes the 1,074 pages in one page. However, what I've done is Schedule F. There's a net Schedule F from 1 to 16. Each electoral area or participating member has its own budget summarized. So they don't have to go through the 1,000 pages. They can just go to their schedule and look at what they need.
That's a good point. I'll ask Danny. Danny, if you don't mind, would you be able to bring up RDOS Regional Connections, and we'll show that website and just familiarize people with it. Again, we're recording this budget presentation on Thursday, January 12th, between 6 and 7 p.m. It will be available on YouTube. The public consultation or community consultation process of the budget, the entire budget process, will wrap up on February 17th. So that's the point when you'd like to get all of the data in, all the information and feedback from people, and then you move on to the next section, which would be the second reading, of course. What happens after second reading as far as the status of this budget and any potential input or feedback, whether it's from the public or from staff or directors?
So at the second reading, before the board authorizes second reading, they will receive all the comments that I'm receiving, and they could either, the board can make the changes right on the spot, or what I would recommend is that they then look at the changes and discuss what they want added or deleted at third reading. But that's based on all the comments. One of the things I want to add is, yes, the budget is 1,074 pages, but if you picture a pyramid, that's what I created. The tip of the pyramid is a summary. The bottom of the pyramid is everything. So those that want to see everything, they go to the bottom of the pyramid. Those that want to just concerned with the summary, that's all they have to do. And then anything in between is there. So the goal is transparency, and I believe that we've met it with this budget and the past budgets we've had.
So after February 17th, when the public consultation phase closes, what would you do with any additional feedback that came in from the public? It really, at that point, it's in the hands of the area directors and the municipalities. Is that right?
That's correct. So I'm not going to make any changes based on what I receive. It's the board will then get all that information, and then they will then let me know what they would like to change, add, reduce, etc. And in some cases, some of the asks may not be realistic, and the board may not change that. But in some other cases, for instance, on like the grant and aids, that might change.
And the budget as a whole and the individual schedules that you mentioned, the final decision comes down to a board decision. It's not just an individual electoral area director. Is that right?
That the board as a whole votes on the budget. Yes.
So let's use an example. We'll pick A, electoral area A. The director has said this is the way he thinks it should lay out, but he wants to change something. Does the board vote on that?
Yeah.
Where does the board come in?
Yes, they vote on that. However, if the electoral area A wants to change something and it only affects electoral area A, the board would actually take direction from the electoral area. They would vote from the A. Mark Pendergraft would have to make the recommendation, and the board votes on it if they accept it or not. It changes if it's something that's a regional and somebody asks for a change, then it's not just one person that's making a recommendation. It'd be the board as a whole would have to vote on it, and that's kind of a difficult decision because there has to be a consequence. And one of the things that I would prepare to the board is, if they accept something, what's the consequence? If they don't accept it, what's the consequence? Because it doesn't help them if I just say they wanted mosquito control.
Yeah.
They want mosquito control decreased. Okay, what's the consequence? Then I would get the manager to help me out with that.
Provided a good opportunity to provide an accolade to the mosquito program. I've heard so much about the mosquito program in the last while. They do amazing work, and it's not easy. Mosquitoes, there's many of them. It's widespread. They don't follow borders. So that's an incredible program, but it's complicated in its own way.
Just so everyone knows, I use mosquito as an example. 2023 is the first year that the cost distribution changed. It went from usage to 3-year rolling average usage to assessment. So some members, the cost went materially high, and others went low.
So let's go back to that idea then of an electoral area director wants to make a change, but the board has to vote on it. The board, in theory, takes the direction of that electoral area director because it's in their area. But what if the board doesn't agree with them? What if the board says, you've made that recommendation for your electoral area, but we as a board don't agree, and they could potentially vote against them?
That's correct. It won't change. It has to be a majority.
So that normally doesn't happen, though, I would hope. It sounds complicated, and I'm just being devil's advocate here.
I see the board as cooperative, and
Yeah.
they listen. This is a great board, so I haven't seen any issues.
No.
And
I just thought I'd ask that.
that could happen in municipalities too,
Mhm.
where you have a mayor and 6 councillors, and you can get a 4-3 vote on the change.
So you have 16 different budgets, is that right?
I have 162 budgets.
So
I have 16 tax requisitions.
TAC requisition, that's right. Okay, so we're talking 9 electoral areas, 6 municipalities, and Penticton Indian Band.
Correct.
Can you explain how Penticton Indian Band fits into this whole process?
They have a small number of services. I have them here. Again, they pay just like everyone else for the services that they are part of, and they are part of 911 emergency planning. They pay their portion of general government because they get benefit from the other services, and solid waste management. And solid waste management is a legislative requirement for municipalities and regional districts, but not necessarily for the Penticton Indian Band. So it's great that they're part of this.
I don't see any questions at this point, so I'm going to continue on with asking you a few more questions. We're on until 7 o'clock. Again, we're recording this on Thursday, January 12th, and this video will be available on YouTube after the fact. A couple of quick things I'll mention. Voyant Alert is the notification system that the RDOS uses to contact citizens, both residents and property owners, because there are a lot of people who live outside of the area. And I want to remind you that if you haven't signed up for Voyant Alert yet, you should certainly do so. You can find more information on the RDOS website, rdos.bc.ca. But an important point, when you go in to sign up for Voyant Alert, you do need to select which notifications you would like, because the default is you'll get all of them. And not everybody wants to know about every meeting that's going on and all the different things. The one you can't unsubscribe from is emergencies, and ultimately that's why Voyant Alert is so important, is that if there are any situations arising in the area and we need to contact people, the RDOS needs to contact you right away through text, telephone, or email. We can do so using Voyant Alert. So if you haven't signed up for Voyant Alert, please do so. If you have an account right now, good time to go in and check your account, make sure that your address is updated and that your preferences are updated as well. That's one note I wanted to make. Now, the other one is on some of these services that some areas have the service and other areas don't. So an electoral area, for example, there's a noise control bylaw. Some areas it's relevant and others it's not. Does that complicate this whole budget process where you have, it's not across the board, it's pockets?
No, it's actually, the system's it's very smooth. With 162 services, we actually have an in-house program that we type in the tax requisition for each of the budgets and the assessments, numbers that we get from BC Assessment, and the program automatically creates the tax requisition, which is, again, just quickly go down, Danny, if you can go to this in a bit, into mine. Just got to find it. So this, what's on the screen now, or will be in a few seconds, this is an in-house program, something that it shows, consolidates, summarizes all of the different tax requisitions per area. Each area has its own summary. So you can go to the city of Penticton, for instance, and list all of the services that they're involved. I'm just looking at it right now. It looks like they're involved in about 20 services. Again, that's in-house. The budget program is also in-house, so we can make changes on the fly. So that's something that the taxpayer doesn't have to pay for. So that's something staff wrote. So it's not that difficult. The difficult part is essentially trying to be as accurate as you can in creating the operating budget. And that's why it starts in August. I write the budget, actually, program budget requirements in July. And in August, the managers receive it with the controls. And from there, the budget starts to be created. And it takes a while to do. It's not something that it's easy because of while we say we have 162 budget services, there's probably 2,000 different GL codes that go against 162. And then,
can you tell us what a GL code is?
The GL code is for us, it's a 10-digit number that itemizes each type of expense within the budget. So we may have a general operation, electricity, water charges, contract costs, wages. And on the wages, we may have full-time wages, part-time wages, electrical contractors, things like that. So with the software that is a software that we purchased, that's not in-house, and we're restricted to the limits of that software, but it is robust in that we can put it into our own Excel program and make it do whatever magic we want it.
This is your second tour with the RDOS. You were at the RDOS quite a few years ago, is that right?
2006.
And in the same role back then?
I was the CFO then.
CFO. Have things changed considerably in this process? I know there's new software available, but has the process of creating the budget for the RDOS changed considerably since 2006, would you say?
It evolved from the time, slightly from the time I was here the first time. I changed it back to what it was when I was here in 2006. I liked it. So that's when I say that we have an in-house program. It's an in-house program I wrote. And I also wrote a municipal program for the municipal taxes, but which you can't use here because it's completely different.
You've also made a few changes over the last couple of years. Can you highlight a few of the changes that we've seen with this budget that was meant to help with the transparency, but also to make the budgets functional?
Well, the biggest single change is you got the 1,074 pages and the different schedules. I've added in, I do the budget by program. Then I do a budget program listing variance. Anything that there's a major variance that's 3% plus or minus, I show the board that. So it's more information. Like I said, that pyramid system I created, I'm simplifying it, but there's more to it. But bottom line is we're transparent. I haven't heard that we're not since I've started this new system.
We often hear of people who move to a regional district from a municipality or another area, and the municipality model is quite a bit different than an RDOS model as far as services. So you mentioned 162 different services. So streetlights are a good example. You won't find a lot of streetlights in a regional district, but you might want some. What would someone do if they want a streetlight?
They'd have to petition for it. There'd have to be a new service. So it's not just come to us. We would have to go and petition the people in the area and have an approval process. So to create a service is it's work. You have to create a bylaw. You have to have a assent from the public. So it can happen. Since just this year alone, we've added 4 services. So that, and the year before that, we added 2. So it's not stagnant. The more services people want, the more budgets we have.
But it's a specific service, so you're not moving money around from service to service. No, it's very specific to that service.
We cannot move money from one service to another. Those 162 services are self-sustaining. And by that, I mean they fund themselves either through user fees or taxes or parcel tax. So we cannot move it by law.
So when a service is added, you mentioned 4 this time around, what does that do to your budget? That becomes another line item?
Yes, another page. So that Schedule D went from, it was 158, I believe, to 162.
Biggest challenge then in creating and taking this budget from where you started, you mentioned in August, through to the end of March when it has to be finalized, when it has to be adopted by the board. What are some of the biggest challenges you face in that come to mind?
The changes that happen from the first workshop to the third reading. One of the biggest changes at first reading, there's probably 50 or 60 changes that are documented and not official until the board authorizes the change as a whole. So as the request and the changes come to me, I document them. I state what the original request was. I show what the change is, and then the result. And then the board authorizes them, and then they become official. So right now, as of today, I got another request for a change. So I documented it, and it's not official until the board tells me that it's okay.
We talked about the community consultation phase wrapping up the end of the day on February 17th. That's when you've taken all that information in from the public. What about the directors for each electoral area? And then I guess we could say the municipalities as well. What's the deadline for them to provide any changes?
That's ongoing. They can make the changes right up until third reading.
Third reading.
That's their call, and it's their taxes, it's their budget. It's not my budget. It's the board's budget.
So second reading wouldn't happen until after February 17th then?
No, okay. So I would be taking the changes and requests, whatever I get, at second reading. So I'll be asking for a second reading with the changes that the board then has 2 or 3 weeks to look at it and let me know what they would like. So if it's something that affects one specific area, what I would do is I would just itemize it, and the board could say yes or no to each one of them, and then that changes that budget. Last year, the budget changed at third reading. The board made some quick changes. So the recommendation was that the budget be adopted as amended.
Just checking to see if we have any questions. I don't see any here yet, which is, I think, a good thing. A lot of information that people have to absorb, and if there are no questions, there could be questions tomorrow. Maybe that's some of what we're talking about tonight could bring up some questions. I want to remind everyone that there are, again, some budget workshops coming up, depending on when you're watching this. January 17th, Karamias. That's at 3 o'clock at the Similkameen Rec Center, and that is for Electoral Area G. And Director Tim Roberts will be present along with yourself. Then you'll be heading over to Headley at 6 o'clock for another budget presentation. And again, you'll have the individual budgets for these electoral areas that you'll be presenting and talking about.
All the PowerPoint presentations are completed, and I'm ready to do them all.
Okay. And then February 4th at Apex, that is at 3 o'clock, and another one February 11th, just confirmed for Kaleden. That's scheduled for 4 o'clock. And all of this information you can get on the RDOS Regional Connections Interactive website, rdosregionalconnections.ca. And just looking here at our chat session, and Electoral Area F Director Riley Gettins is heading off to another meeting. She'll be taking part in soil deposition bylaw public information meeting. That's at 7 o'clock on January 12th. So it's back-to-back meetings for Director Gettins. And for each of the electoral area directors, specifically to the directors, there is a lot of work around budget time, but that's really just the start of it. It continues through the year with all of the other things that come up for the area directors to now implement what the budget authorized.
The directors work hard, and they are an integral part in the budget, and ultimately they're the ones that have to approve it. So I really respect the hard work that they put into this budget.
Where do the alternate directors for the electoral areas, where do they come into play with this process? Is there a conversation that takes place usually, or how does that work?
Not with me. They would vote on it if the director is not at the meeting, but unless I hear from them indirectly through the director.
But it's the director that you'd be speaking with.
Yes.
Okay, we are wrapping up now because we're out of time. I do appreciate your time, Jim. I know it's a busy time for you, and you've got many more presentations still to come. I hope the video presentation is something that has provided some added value to people, to give anyone in the area, whether you're in the regional district or in the municipalities, a little extra information. And Jim, thanks again.
Thank you for this. I really appreciate the time, because the more knowledge is power, and I want to empower everyone.
All right. Well, thank you. So a reminder, if you have any feedback on the RDOS budget, the official name of the budget at this point is RDOS 2023-2027 5-year financial plan bylaw number 2988, 2023. If you have any feedback, the email address is budget@rdos.bc.ca. That's budget@rdos.bc.ca. You can send an email there. You can also send message through the mail if you'd like, to the RDOS office at 101 Martin Street in Penticton, V2A5J9. That's V2A5J9. And if you need to use the phone, you can always call the RDOS as well, and we can put you through to Jim Zaffino if he's around, if he's not out in the field presenting the budget. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. We really do appreciate your time. We'd like to thank Jim Zaffino, the manager of finance for the RDOS, and of course, as always, to Danny Francisco, who's the manager of information services, who is behind the scenes making sure the technology works. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a great evening.